Hello BookTube. Today on my 2023 library tour, I will be finishing up science fiction and fantasy. I have two shelves to go, so let's get started. First up is one of the classics of science fiction and fantasy, Dune by Frank Herbert. I read it ages ago and loved it that first time I read it, but like so many classics of science fiction and fantasy, my subsequent readings of the book have not been as enjoyable as I would have liked. I think in part because I don't quite know how to work my way through the Atreides. House Atreides is the family from which Dune's main character, Paul Atreides, comes from, and they are famous for being noble, as they are as heroic as one can be in this setting. But they are also hypocrites, and as Paul Atreides becomes Muad'Dib, as he becomes emperor, there's a lot of evil that he commits, namely after he becomes emperor, and that is never satisfactorily addressed. And I'm not entirely sure how I should address it, like me processing that. I mean, of course, that's rich creative material, but as far as enjoying Dune goes, it's a bit more of a struggle. I mean, of course, the point of Dune and the entire series is beware the Superman, beware the prophet, beware the God Emperor. So, yeah. But I do have three more books in the series. There is a Dune Messiah. There is Children of Dune. And there is God Emperor of Dune, which I actually really like. I'm not too fond of Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, but God Emperor of Dune was actually, on my first read at least, pretty good. I'm not entirely sure if I will have that opinion if and when I go back to it. But anyway. And as far as film adaptations go, I remember really enjoying the sci-fi miniseries, and the Lynch version from the 80s is okay. And I haven't got to the more recent one yet. Anyway, next are three books in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. First up is Total the Hounds, which is, I think, somewhere early in the series, but I don't quite know where. Again, for a few years, I had the habit of just picking up a lot of science fiction and fantasy that I thought I should have in my collection without really reading it. And that's why I have a lot of entries in like series, even though I haven't read the first book in the series, or I may not necessarily like that first book in the series. So anyway, this is Memories of Ice. And sorry if the lighting's a bit wonky. How I have the computer laid out, it's sort of shadowed, I guess. This is Reaper's Gate. And moving on, I also have all of a series by Peter V. Brett. This is The Core, Book 5 of the Demon Cycle. And then back to Malazan. This is Gardens of the Moon, the first book. I picked this up years ago and bailed on it. And then, of course, this past December, Malazan was, or Gardens of the Moon was one of the books for my Bell Redemption December, which ended up carrying over into this early this year, and I had another go at it and bailed on it again. So, yeah. So I don't think the rest of the Malazan books will be sticking around either. This is another book, House of Chains. And then back to the Demon Cycle. This is the first book this is the second book in the series, The Warded Man. And then there is The Desert Spear. The Daylight War. Wait, so is The Desert Spear the first book? No, that's book. Okay, The Skull Throne is book 4. So I think the Warded Man has to be book 1. Again, I have not gotten to that series yet. I probably should. Somehow or other, I don't know. Anyway, moving on from incredibly long fantasy series. This is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. There's a period where I wanted to pick up a lot of Neil Gaiman and never really got around to reading it, although I think this is the only one I have besides American Gods, which I picked up a year or two ago because I really wanted a new copy of the book. I had a copy ages ago, shortly after it came out, and actually ended up bailing on the book when I had it. Picked it up from the library, read it. It was a Bell Redemption, and I quite liked it, but I never got around to rereading it or picking it back up until just recently. So I picked it up in this really lovely UK paperback edition. Next is a return to William Gibson. This is Burning Chrome. This is a collection of short stories and I think nonfiction. Or maybe just a collection of short stories by him. And I picked this up largely because I wanted to reread Burning Chrome, which I read when I TA'd a class a few years ago, or when I was in college, which was more than a few years ago. It was almost 20 years ago now. And the class was on computers and society. So part of the class was what computer science is, and the other half was a lit class. And Burning Chrome was one of the readings for the class, and I actually really enjoyed it. That was largely the impetus of why I picked up Neuromancer and Count Zero, because I picked up Neuromancer while I was in San Francisco. And while one would think cyberpunk, which of course Burning Chrome and a lot of this period in William Gibson's career was cyberpunk, would have featured a lot heavier in a computer-oriented culture class or lit class. There were other science fiction works like The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, 1984 by George Orwell, which I actually didn't like. And I don't particularly care for The Dispossessed either. But I've never actually gone back to reread it since that first reading ages ago. Anyway, moving on, this is The Difference Engine by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling. This is the first book of, this is the first cyberpunk novel. It's, I think, a more historical novel than anything else, but I've never gotten around to it. And to finish off this shelf, this is The Magicians by Lev Grossman. This is the first book in a trilogy about a young magician named Quentin Coldwater who goes to a magical university called Breakbells. Quentin is obsessed with a fantasy series that he learns is actually based on true events. Basically, The Magicians is the result of, it's basically the literary baby of a four-way between J.K. Rowling, C.S. Lewis, Donna Tartt, and Bret Easton Ellis. I read the book from the library shortly after it came out, maybe a bit more than that. And I liked the first part of it quite a bit, but once Quentin and his friends leave school, I fell out of it. It really didn't interest me, and I picked up this edition largely because I wanted to have another go at it, but I've never really gotten around to it. Moving on, next is The 11th Sun by Gulong. This is a wuxia novel by one of the main writers of wuxia from the 20th century. I really enjoyed this book. I read it a few years ago and quite enjoyed it, but I haven't revisited it since. But I wish more of Gulong's work was translated. I'm happy to see that Jen Yong's is, but a lot of other works could be done, and even more contemporary stuff, because there's quite a lot of interesting fantasy coming out of China. And science fiction, too, although the science fiction is getting a bit more coverage than the fantasy. Anyway, moving on. This is Mage's Blood by David Hare, the first book in the Moontide Quartet. I'm not entirely sure why I picked it up, but I have not gotten around to it yet. Next is The Black Stranger and Other American Tales by Robert E. Howard. This is a collection of, I think, mostly horror stories, or maybe others. I haven't really read this collection. I picked it up largely because there was a time when I wanted to have a lot more Robert E. Howard than just Conan, but I only really got to this. But I do have all of Robert E. Howard's Conan stories in these wonderful Del Rey editions. This is the first book in the trilogy, The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. I also have The Bloody Crown of Conan and The Conquering Sword of Conan. And I've often thought about trying to pick up at some point the big omnibus edition that has all of the stories that the Galans put out. But I guess the Del Reys really work well, and I think have a bit more material than the Galans edition does. This next book is The Fire Stone by Tanya Huff. I don't recall much about it. I don't really remember why I picked it up. I've had it for a few years. And honestly, I think this might actually be a print-on-demand book. Anyway, because the book's kind of weird. But anyway. The next batch of books are all anthologies by David G. Hartwell with various collaborators. First up is The Ascent of Wonder, The Evolution of Hard SF, edited by David G. Hartwell and Catherine Kramer. This is, if you're interested in hard science fiction and the history of hard science fiction, this is definitely a book for you. I also have kind of the second book in that sort of hard SF anthology series. I guess you could call it a series, but this is sort of a follow-up to The Ascent of Wonder. This is a hard SF Renaissance, again edited by Hartwell and Kramer. Although I am not terribly happy with the condition this book came in. Although I'm guessing this had to have been a university. because this kind of looks like it had to have been kind of like a university bookstore, had its hand on it at some point. I also have the Space Opera Renaissance, edited by Hartwell and Kramer. This is a really good anthology as well. Although it's been a while since I dived into it. I'd hoped to do like a anthology read of one of these, but I've never gotten around to reading it outside of dipping into it. I also have the Sword and Sorcery anthology, edited by Hartwell, and this time joined by Jacob Weissman. This has some, I think there are a few good stories in here, but some of the others not so much. And there's, for some odd reason, a Song of Ice and Fire excerpt in here, which I don't know why. But anyway, moving on from Hartwell, but sticking with anthologies, this is the Weird Tales anthology, edited by Marvin Kaye. This came out in the 70s or 80s and has a number of stories published by Weird Tales, I think. No? Yeah. And then also some reprints as well. So I haven't really dived as much into this one as I would like. Speaking of Bell Redemption December, The Promise of Space and Other Stories by James Patrick Kelly, which I picked up. I think I actually bought this on release day. I think I pre-ordered it, or maybe not. But I did have a go at it, bailed on it. I think the second story, did a bail redemption of it. Got about halfway through the book before I bailed on it again. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan at all. Moving on, next is The Dark Tower, Book 1, The Gunslinger, by Stephen King. This is initially, I think, a short story collection that became the first book in the Dark Tower series. I actually rather like this book, although obviously this is the only Stephen King I have that is not in one of the Books of Exile. Although the Boxes of Exile might be busting loose and back onto my shelves either tomorrow or this weekend. But I'll talk a bit more about that with weekly reads. Next is a book that I have because I had hoped at some point to do a Bell redemption of, and that is Knights of Viljamur by Mark Sharon Newton. So I read I bailed on Knights of Viljamur years ago and wanted to revisit it, but never got around to it. Bought this, still haven't gotten around to it yet. Next is a book that I'm not entirely sure why I have, but I have it. I mean, probably I picked it up because of the whole collecting thing and wanting to have a lot of work that I thought might be eventual classics of science fiction and fantasy, but I do have Aragon by Christopher Paolini, although I've never read it, and I will probably be sending it on its way in the next when I do my donation. And so the final two books on the shelf is a return to Conan, but not Robert E. Howard's Conan, to the Conan of the Pastiches, the Tor Pastiches. So my first encounter with Conan, outside of the movies, because the first would have been Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer, was the Conan the Barbarian comic book series. And then a few years later, in the late 90s, when I first got into adult science fiction and fantasy, I discovered the Tor Conan pastiches. And I read quite a few of them. I don't quite remember how many. I know there were like Leonard Carpenter, Roland Green, Steve Perry, maybe another one, and also Robert Jordan before The Wheel of Time. And so I have, over the past few years, wanted to revisit the Conan pastiches that Tor put out. I did pick up two from a local used bookstore, Golden's Book Exchange, but I did pick up two omnibus editions of Robert Jordan's Conan pastiches. So this is the Conan Chronicles. It has, let me see here. What books are in here? So Conan the Invincible, Conan the Defender, and Conan the Unconquered. I want to say I've read all of them. I'm pretty sure I've read all of them, but I don't really remember much of any of them. Because again, it's been well over 20 years since I read them. And I also have another omnibus bind up, the Further Chronicles of Conan, with a very interesting cover. So this one includes Conan the Magnificent, Conan the Triumphant, and Conan the Victorious. And again, I think I might have read all three of these. So anyway, but it's been ages and I would like to revisit them, but after my experience with Conan the Savage last year for Carb August, I don't know really if I should or shouldn't. Guess it's something I need to debate while I decide what my science fiction and fantasy collection will be going forward. And I'll talk a bit more about that on Weekly Reads, because I'm not entirely sure how my reading is going to go tomorrow or Saturday, because I will be devoting a lot of my time to putting up 2 new bookcases and rearranging my books, which I know I probably should have done my 2023 library tour after I did the library rearrange instead of before or during. But yeah, Steve Donahue was doing his library tour and he felt a little lonely, so I decided to join in, and then kind of decided to, in the middle of it or towards the end of it, well, no, more in the middle of it, because there's about 3 weeks left, depending how I want to do my history wall, which will be coming next week. If I will do just one shelf a day or do 2, like I've done with the science fiction and fantasy. So anyway, decisions. But regardless, I will be back later this afternoon with a tag video. And then, tomorrow I will do the manga in the library tour. I'll try to do all however 100 plus volumes I have in one video, which might be interesting, might also involve quite a bit of maneuvering, but we'll see how that goes. I'll decide what I want to do, if I want to show each individual volume or just the first book in each first volume. I don't know. But anyway, BookTube, until I see you later this evening, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.